This past Shabbos we read from the Aseret Hadibros, popularly misunderstood as the 10 Commandments. It's really a misnomer. It's the 10 principles. It's not called the Aseret Mitzvahs. It's the Aseret Hadibros, as we'll see. And there's a minhag yitro in many shuls that people stand for the Aseret Hadibros. Of course, I mean people who don't stand all year round. The Ramah quotes in the Maram Rurenberg, another minhag, Meikar Adin, one is not obligated to stand during Kriyas HaTorah. Perhaps during the Baruch SHMOT Baruch, which is a Davash Kedusha, then one you do have to stand. But for the actual laning part, one is not obligated to stand. But the Ramah quotes in the Maram Rurenberg, a Chumrah, that he used to stand for the whole, from Bereshis to Zos HaBracha. And I'll cover the Torah, or, perhaps a reenactment of Maimon Har Sinai. So some have a minhag to stand all year round, so it's not an issue. But most have a minhag of sitting and standing up for the Aseret Hadibros and other special parts of the Torah. And it's a very difficult custom at first glance, maybe second and third also. But at first glance, it's a very difficult custom. Why the Rambam seems to scream Chai V'Kayim, go psycho on those who some people stand up for the Aseret Hadibros. He's very bothered by it. He says, you're giving more credence to the Aseret Hadibros than you are to the rest of the Torah. There's no difference between Bereshis Bara Elokim and Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It's the same Kedusha Sefer Torah, whether you're reading Bereshis, SHMOS, Bamidbar. So by standing up for the Aseret Hadibros, you are giving more credence. You think this is more important than the rest of the Torah. In fact, we find the Gemara talks about there are certain religions who basically made it, that was it. They just kept 10 mitzvahs, they kept the 10 commandments, that was it. And we find we go out of our way, not to. So therefore, the Rambam is very bothered by this minhag of standing up for the Aseret Hadibros. What is it based on? So he says there is no basis, but how do we explain it? So there are two different approaches. One approach is based on Rav Saadia Gaon. Rav Saadia Gaon tells us that the 613 mitzvahs equal the Aseret Hadibros, or to put it, 6 plus 1 plus 3 equal 10. The 630 commandments equal to 10 dibros. In fact, Rav Saadia Gaon has a whole sefer showing how you can find all 613 mitzvahs in the Aseret Hadibros. In fact, so the question is, where do you find Pesach in the Aseret Hadibros? So, Zocher Shama Shabbos and Kosher, the concept of sanctifying time. And that's how we know not only Shabbos, or the Yom Tovim. Where do we find not to murder? Or no, we know where to find not to murder. Oh, Sirtzach, number 6. Where do we find, I say, not to embarrass someone publicly? So he says it's time to go Sirtzach. The Gemara says one who embarrasses someone publicly, it's like Shvichas. So he goes through, obviously some are more of a push than others, but he has a whole sefer showing how if you go deep enough, you get down to the root of it, you'll find all 613 mitzvahs in the Aseret Hadibros. So basically, what's Rav Saadia Gaon saying? The Aseret Hadibros is why we stand up for the Aseret Hadibros, not because those specific 10 mitzvahs, but its representative quality. It represents the whole Torah, and therefore that's the minhag Yisrael, to standing for the Aseret Hadibros based on its representative quality. That's how some suggest based on Rav Saadia Gaon. But I'm assuming the Rambam knew Rav Saadia Gaon, whether he knew it from Rav Saadia Gaon, knew it by himself. So he was aware of this, that it's only the 10 principles, and within the 10 principles you find the 600, and yet he still was against the minhag of standing during the Aseret. So how do we reconcile the Rambam with our minhag Yisrael? So Rav Soloveitchik explained as follows. That we read, how many times? Well, we read the Aseret Hadibros in Parshas Yithro and in Parshas V'eschanan. And the different ways of laning, speaking of laning, that there's different ways of laning the Aseret Hadibros. It's called Tam Elyon and tam tachton. Literally, the elyon is high, tachton as well. But what does it mean in practical terms? There are other differences, but the main difference between tam elyon and tam tachton is, do I read them by commandments, or do I read them by the psukim? In other words, in one pasuk, sometimes you have 3 commandments. So I say, whoa, do I stop after each commandment, or do I go by... So the regular reading is tam tachton, you go by psukim. By tam elyon, that's what you read by commandment. So what do? So we always read tam elyon. We read tam elyon, we read our parshas. I guess every show is different, but we read tam elyon. Now we read Veschanan. There's a third time we also read from the Aseret HaDibros. Besides Parshas Yithro and Parshas Veschanan, when is that? When do we read the Aseret HaDibros? Very good. Shavuos. On Shavuos we read from the Aseret HaDibros. So the Magen Avraham quotes an interesting minhag that we don't necessarily follow, but he quotes a minhag that when you read the Aseret HaDibros on Shavuos, you read it tam elyon, and when you read it in Yithro Veschanan, you read it tam tachton. So that's not necessarily our minhag, but what's the logic, the Rav Selevan here? What's the Magen Avraham going? Where is he going with it? What's the lumdis in the Magen Avraham? What's he actually saying here? Why is that so? So the Magen Avraham is saying as follows. He's saying when you read Parshas Yithro and Parshas Veschanan as the Torah's Parsha Shavua, so then you read it like any other week. You read tam tachton. But on Shavuos, which is a reenactment of Maimon Har Sinai, we're going back to Jews accepted the Torah in Har Sinai. So when you're reading the Aseret HaDibros, the Torah's reenactment, so you're reading it tam elyon, so therefore you're taking it into a different level. So perhaps Rav Soloveitchik explained as follows. The our minhag is we read it tam elyon all the time. So therefore that's why we stand, because by reading it tam elyon, you are showing you're not reading it as a regular Parsha Shavua. But the Rambam mentions, there is no mention at all in the Rambam about tam tachton, tam elyon. The Rambam didn't go for tam elyon. So therefore, apparently in the Rambam Shul, they never read it tam elyon. They read it tam tachton. Hence the Rambam's theming. If you're reading it tam tachton, like you're reading Parshas Yithro the same way you're reading everything, then why stand up? Then you're doing exactly, it's apikarsis, it's kfira. You are giving more credence to one part of the Torah over the other. Hence, that's why the Rambam holds that even for the Aseret HaDibros, which he read tam tachton, that is why the Rambam Shita was that you sit down because, and you go with the Gemaras throughout, that we go out of our way not to give too much credence to the Aseret HaDibros, because there are different religions then, and people will be in the mistaken impression that the Aseret HaDibros are more important than the rest of the Torah. And that's why, in general, as the Maharam pointed out, when we read Kriyas HaTorah in general, as the Ramban writes, Pen Tishchach as Hashem Mokecha, is Pen Tishchach as Maimon Har Sinai, it's a general mitzvah, the Ramban writes, when we read Kriyas HaTorah, that we always do things, we want to remember how it was given Har Sinai. And to conclude, that's what the Pshat, we say, the last 8 psukim, the Gemara says, well, the last 8 psukim is a whole machlokas in the Gemara, who wrote the last 8 psukim of the Torah? Was it Moshe or was Yoshua? So it's a dispute. The one said, of course it was Moshe. It's Torah Sivano Moshe. How could you have the Torah incomplete? So how do you explain Moshe writing about his own death? It's Miksei Kashikra, so that they say he wrote it b'dama, he wrote it quietly. And according to the opinion that says Yoshua wrote it, so that's why it's a kasha. How could Yoshua write the last 8 psukim? Isn't it Torah Moshe? But it explains at least why the last 8 psukim are in. So we had the Vilna Gaon that explained that really both did it. Elu ve'elu divro kim chayim, that the Ramban writes in the beginning of Sefer SHMOS, they're really the Torah SHMOS Osho HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're all names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, when Moshe wrote the last 8 psukim, he wrote it in the pristine state. Like, it was all, we wouldn't be able to read it. We didn't know what it means. But it was a name. And Yoshua came along and he finished the job. he put it in the kudos, he separated the letters in order to we understand it. So either way, that's the last thing, is a major dispute. So the Gemara says it's because of this dispute, whether Yehovah Moshe wrote it, b'dema, quietly, silently, or not. In fact, that's Rav Soloveitchik. What is the Rambam Shita? The Rambam holds. So the Gemara says Yachid Koreism. So there are many halachas what that means, but the Rambam says, you know what Yachid Koreism means? You can read the last 8 psukim without a minyan. You don't need a minyan for the last 8 psukim. So the Ravid screams Chai v'Kayam, Ech HaMinyan Halach. Where did the minyan go? Clearly he wasn't familiar with the Kiddush club, and especially on Simchas Torah, they're all making Kiddush. That's where the minyan goes. But on Simchas Torah anyway. So therefore, what's the pshat in the Rambam? What do you mean? You don't need a minyan. Why would I need a minyan for the last 8 psukim? So Rav Soloveitchik explains along the lines we were saying here, because why do we read Kriyas HaTorah? It's Zeichel Kabbalas HaTorah. It's the way the Torah was given at Har Sinai and throughout the Jews throughout the Midbar. So how is the whole Torah given? Moshe, however you want to learn different machlokas in the Gemara, whether he gave it all at one time or he explained it throughout the trip on the Midbar. So let's assume throughout the trip on the Midbar, which is more logical and easier to understand. So each time he called Klal Yisrael together and he said it over to them. So what happened in the last 8 psukim? He made a big thing about his obituary, like as the guy who faked his own death because he wanted to go to hear all the eulogies and see what they would say about him. Moshe Rabbeinu felt, everything had a strong enough self-esteem, he wasn't worried. So what did he do? So that's what the Mefarshim say. On the last 8 psukim, he went and he taught the Torah privately to the different people. So that's the pshat Rav Soloveitchik said. That's the pshat in the Rambam. If the whole reading of the Kriyas HaTorah is Zeichel Kabbalas HaTorah, so how was the Torah given? So when it came to Kol HaTorah Kulo, it was given with Tzibor, so therefore we needed Tzibor only lane. But the last 8 psukim, Yachid Koreosam, is Dafka, because since Moshe Rabbeinu taught it privately, so too, in theory, one does not need a minyan. But that's the whole yisod of the Rambam and the Ramban, that when we read, whether one has a minhag, everyone has a minhag to stand for the Aseres HaDibros, whether you have a minhag to stand for the whole Torah or not, but the concept of many halachas that we do, laning Monday, Thursday, Shabbos, is all to remember our special mitzvah of never to forget of Maimon Har Sinai, and that's what the Maharam Rimberg said. He stood all week long as a zecher to Matan Torah, the zecher of Kabbalas Torah Misinai.